off the coast of a quiet Japanese fishing village, something strange was happening beneath the waves. For years, the waters here had grown emptier. Nets came back light. Boats returned early. Fishermen who once knew these reefs by heart said the fish were vanishing. Then, in a stretch of sea barely larger than a few city blocks, everything changed. Divers went down expecting the usual silence. Instead, they found schools of fish so dense they blocked the sunlight. Groupers the size of grown men, species that hadn't been seen in the area for over a decade. Local fishermen were confused. Some refused to believe the reports. Others rushed out with cameras, certain it had to be exaggeration. It wasn't. What they found inside that small patch of ocean would force scientists to ask a question no one expected to matter this much. What happens to the sea when humans simply stop taking from it? The answer would ripple far beyond this one reserve and challenge everything nearby fishing communities believed about survival, tradition, and the ocean's ability to heal. This is the story of how one small, closed zone off the coast of Japan quietly became one of the most closely watched marine experiments in the country. The village sits on the southern coast, where narrow inlets cut into volcanic rock. For generations, families here made a living the same way. Small boats, hand lines, nets pulled by hand at dawn. But by the early 2000s, the catch was shrinking fast. Fishermen who once hauled in baskets of snapper and grouper were coming home with barely enough to sell. One local fisherman, a man named Tanaka, had worked these waters since he was a boy. He remembers the change vividly. The reefs looked the same, he said, but underneath they were empty. Marine researchers from a nearby university began surveying the area. What they found was troubling. Fish populations had dropped by more than half in under 20 years. Certain species had disappeared from local records entirely. The cause seemed obvious at first. Overfishing, too many boats, too little time for fish stocks to recover. But something didn't add up. Even in areas with fewer boats, the fish weren't returning. Something deeper was disrupting the cycle. Local officials proposed a small experiment. Close a tiny section of coastline to all fishing. No nets, no lines, no boats allowed to anchor. Many fishermen were furious. This was their livelihood, their father's livelihood. Now they were being told to stay away from the very water that fed their families. Tanaka argued against it at first. "We thought it was a death sentence for the village," he said. But with fish stocks collapsing and no other solution in sight, the reserve was approved. No one expected what would happen next. Within months, divers monitoring the closed zone noticed something strange stirring beneath the surface, something that would soon draw scientists from across the country. The first dive survey happened 6 months after the closure. Researchers expected small signs of recovery, a few more fish, slightly healthier coral. What they found left them speechless. Schools of juvenile fish packed the shallows in numbers no one had recorded in over a decade. One marine biologist, Dr. Sato, reviewed the footage twice before he believed it. "I thought the camera had malfunctioned," he said. "There were too many fish in one frame." Word spread quickly through the village. Some fishermen dismissed it as luck, a temporary bloom that would fade by winter. Others grew uneasy. If the closed zone was thriving this fast, what did that say about the waters they'd been fishing all along? Then came a stranger detail. divers began spotting large groupers patrolling the reef edges, fish that hadn't been seen in local waters since the 1990s. Older fishermen, including Tanaka, recognized them instantly. "Those weren't young fish," he said. "Those were fish that remembered this reef." Scientists were puzzled. Recovery this fast wasn't supposed to be possible in such a small reserve. The area was barely half a kilometer wide, far smaller than most successful marine sanctuaries around the world. Yet the numbers didn't lie. Fish density inside the closed zone was now nearly 4 times higher than in surrounding waters. Something about this specific patch of coastline was reacting differently than anyone expected. Researchers began pulling water samples, sediment cores, current data. They were searching for an explanation. What they didn't know yet was that the real answer wasn't hiding in the water. It was hiding in what had happened to the reef floor years earlier, a detail that would change how they understood the entire recovery. The sediment cores came back from the lab 3 weeks later. What they showed made Dr. Sato pause. Buried beneath the reef floor were layers of dead coral, decades old, crushed under sediment runoff from the hillside above. It wasn't recent damage. This scarring went back over 30 years. Older residents remembered why. In the 1980s, logging operations had cleared much of the forest above the bay. Rain washed loose soil straight into the sea. Silt settled over the coral, smothering it slowly. No one at the time connected the logging to the fish decline. "We thought the ocean was separate from the land," Tanaka admitted. "We were wrong." But this raised a new question. If the reef had been damaged for 30 years, why was it recovering so fast now? Researchers expected coral regrowth to take a decade or more. Instead, coral cover inside the reserve had already increased by nearly 20% in under a year. Divers began noticing something else, something they hadn't reported yet. Certain patches of reef were regenerating unusually fast, almost unnaturally so, compared to untouched areas nearby. One technician flagged it as a data error. Then, a second survey confirmed the same pattern. Dr. Sato ordered a deeper analysis of current flow through the bay, something no one had closely studied before. What they found suggested the reserve wasn't just protected. It was positioned in a spot where ocean currents behaved differently than anywhere else along the coastline. And if that was true, this recovery wasn't just about stopping fishing. Something about the water itself may have been working in their favor all along, and no one had noticed it until now. The current data took weeks to fully map. When it was finished, Dr. Sato called an emergency meeting with the local fisheries office. The bay's shape, combined with a nearby underwater ridge, created a natural eddy. This eddy trapped nutrient-rich water inside the reserve for longer periods than the surrounding coastline. In simple terms, the closed zone wasn't just resting. It was being fed. Plankton levels inside the reserve were nearly triple those measured just a few hundred meters outside it. That explained the coral's rapid recovery. It explained the explosion of small fish, but it didn't fully explain the groupers. Large predator fish don't return just because food is abundant. They return because they feel safe. Tanaka remembered something from his childhood, a detail he hadn't thought about in years. His father once told him this bay was where the big fish hide when the sea gets rough. No one had taken it seriously. Now, researchers began to suspect the underwater ridge did more than trap nutrients. It may have been sheltering fish from storms and predators for generations, long before the logging, long before the decline. If that was true, this wasn't a random recovery. This reserve sat directly on top of a natural refuge the ecosystem had relied on for decades, one the village had unknowingly cut off through overfishing and habitat damage. Dr. Sato sat with that thought for a long moment. "We didn't create a sanctuary," he said quietly. "We uncovered one that was already there." But one mystery remained. If this refuge had existed all along, why had it taken so long for anyone to notice its importance until the fish nearly disappeared for good? The answer came from something almost overlooked. Old fishing logs, stored in the village community hall for decades, recorded a pattern no one had cross-checked before. Every major storm season, boats had avoided this exact stretch of coastline, not by rule, not by law, by instinct. Generations of fishermen had quietly treated this bay as untouchable during rough seasons, without ever explaining why. Over time, that unspoken respect faded as fishing pressure increased and older traditions were forgotten. When the reserve was finally created, it didn't invent something new. It restored a boundary the village had once honored without realizing its purpose. Tanaka sat with this realization for a long time. "My father wasn't superstitious," he said. "He was protecting something real. We just stopped listening." Word of the recovery spread beyond the village. Fisheries officials from other coastal towns began visiting, hoping to replicate the results. But researchers were careful to explain something important. This wasn't a formula that worked everywhere. It was the result of a very specific combination: ocean currents, an underwater ridge, decades-old damage, and a community willing to step back and wait. Today, the reserve remains closed. Fish populations in the surrounding waters have slowly begun to recover as well, spilling out from the protected zone like a quiet return of something the village had almost lost forever. Tanaka still fishes these waters, but now he keeps his boat a little further from that stretch of coastline. Not out of fear, out of respect. Sometimes protecting the future means recognizing what the past was already trying to tell us. If this story made you think differently about the ocean, subscribe for more real stories of nature's hidden resilience.